I'm seeing the time roll around here to 12 noon, so I'm going to go ahead and kick this session off. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Kristin Lodge, the Director of Development and Communications at the Wenatchee Valley Museum and Cultural Center. Our mission at the museum is to engage and educate the Wenatchee Valley community. We're particularly passionate about education. We strive to be really good partners to our local school districts by providing out-of-classroom experiences to engage students related to our local history. We host students on field trips and summer camps and classes. We have dissections and we have STEM enrichment courses in our makerspace for children of all ages. The museum also serves as a community forum, a place where you can meet your neighbors, learn about issues important to our community, and discuss your thoughts and opinions. While we're not able to physically gather at the museum right now, we can gather virtually in forums like this to inspire engagement. Our goal today is to cultivate conversation around education in our public school systems during the COVID-19 closures. Today, we have an opportunity to hear from local school officials about Wenatchee and Eastmont Public School District's responses to distance learning and efforts to connect with students and families during the COVID-19 closures. With us today is Dr. Paul Gordon, Superintendent of the Wenatchee School District. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Kristin. Thanks for having us. We're really excited about this opportunity to speak with you and everybody who's listening and watching live on Facebook.
Thank you. With us also today is Michael Lane, Executive Director of Learning and Teaching with the Wenatchee School District. Welcome, Michael.
Hello, thank you.
We also are gathered here with Spencer Taylor, Executive Director of Elementary Education from the Eastmont School District. Welcome, Spencer. I think
I was muted. Okay, I just wanted to be the first one to do that to make everybody else feel better. Thank you, Kristin, and hello, everyone. And now I will mute back up so you don't hear any side noises.
Thank you. And last but not least, we're welcoming David Woods, the Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education with the Eastmont School District. Welcome, David.
Thank you. And you won't be seeing my video because I'm not working that way. So
okay.
My camera quit working on my computer.
All right. Our panelists will share information about how the Wenatchee and Eastmont school districts are structuring distance learning. They're going to discuss connectivity, challenges, and opportunities we're facing during this time. We're going to let our panelists share information with us first, and then we're going to open it up to your questions. I'd like to thank all of our attendees for joining us today on Zoom and on Facebook Live. If you're joining us via Zoom on a desktop, feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. If you're on Zoom on a mobile device, the Q&A button is at the top of your screen. We also have the chat activated. You're welcome to send a message. The chat feature sends messages to all of the panelists. So we'll be able to see that, and I'll use that to help monitor questions. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, you may submit questions in the comments. Guests are invited also to send us questions via email at info@wvmcc.org throughout this conversation. I'll be on hand today to moderate the session. I'll monitor your questions in the Q&A section, on chat, on Facebook, and on email, and I'll make sure we get to as many questions as possible. Today, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gordon to kick off the conversation. Dr. Gordon, thank you for being here.
Absolutely, Kristin. Thank you again for hosting all of us. You know, like the Eastmont School District, Mike and I I know Spencer and David feel the same, are just so proud of our staff, of our students, our parents, and our communities in general. None of this has been easy. When we were first notified, we roughly had 3 days to be able to think through what this would look like. Going from a traditional model to an online learning environment for all students. And it really was this trying to figure it out while the airplane was flying and making adjustments along the way. You know, we started with workbooks and some packets, and we're really leaning on other school districts around the state and around the nation to kind of allow us to patch a few things together for a week or so. and then really starting to move toward that online learning in trying to engage a large number of students in this work, and really also having that sense that our educators, that was not their mode of delivery either. For the vast majority, they were used to the face-to-face interaction and what that work looked like. So the professional development, and Mike will be able to talk a little bit more from the Wenatchee School District side of things, but really trying to make sure that we were engaging our teachers and our support staff in what this looks like, because most people were talking about from a student perspective that this was very different, but it was really different for our teachers to engage our kids in a new format. So really proud of our staff and our students, and then just as proud of as our new teachers, all of our parents, our guardians, our grandparents, the neighbors who all came together. And this is why it was such a community effort to really support our students as they were trying to navigate this online world of ours. But again, from where we started to where we're at, really proud of our district leadership team, the work that Mike and his team are doing, our IT team. It really does show you how important, how interconnected everybody is. This gives you that moment to say how important everybody's role is in an organization, from our custodians ensuring that all of our facilities are clean. You know, we have daycare going on. Daycares are not our normal business. So we had to really make sure that we had that under control and doing that well, and making sure that our students and our staff were safe, to transporting food and making sure that we're feeding our community, where our nutritional service team stepped up, and a number of other classified and certified staff members who helped pull that off, serving at this point thousands, about 9,000 meals a week in the Wenatchee School District, and that will continue on here for the foreseeable future. So it really was an all hands on deck and everybody pitching in to really make a difference, with education being at the forefront, but all of these other support processes that are needed. You know, one of the other pieces that we're working on is online. Not all of our students had the technology, had the internet connectivity, and really trying to make sure that both of those are shored up. No one chose to do this. Our kids didn't raise their hands and say, hey, I want to learn virtually. That's not what this situation was. This was a pandemic. We scrambled, we're figuring things out, but it's highlighted the equity issues that are rampant in every school district, but more so in districts like the Wenatchee School District that has, 61% of our students receive support for free and reduced lunch. We have 1,200 migrant students, over 500 homeless students, and ensuring that our students are still engaged. So the technology actually was a little bit more simple than just the human reality of what's occurring in our school district, and I'm sure in the Eastmont School District, the gut-wrenching stories of families who continue to struggle. So we weigh all of these different pieces while we're continuing to focus on educating, continue to ensure that we have the connectivity and the right technology. The reality is still we have a large number of students who aren't connected with us because of a vast number of reasons. Working, they're doing childcare while their parents are working, food, resources, all of those other pieces that we have to take into consideration. And that's why I'm so proud of the work that we're doing on a daily basis. And I guarantee you Spencer and David are saying the same thing in school districts around the country, because this is not just as easy as flip a switch, let's start teaching and learning, and all is well. That's not the reality. Even for our families with a lot of different resources, this is a struggle. This is a challenging time. But again, the optimism, the idea that we're going to keep moving forward in doing this work, because I know one of your questions later on will be, what's next year? And that's a big unknown. But I'd hand it to Mike to talk a little bit more about the specifics of what we're doing with our staff, and our students on a day-to-day basis.
Michael, you are muted.
See, Spencer, I appreciate you being the first one to do that. I just wanted to back you up and make sure you didn't feel isolated. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. So yeah, thank you, Paul. From the learning and teaching department, our perspective was like trying to help our staff create a new mental model of what teaching and learning looks like. If we were continually trying to superimpose our previous mindset around what engagement looks like, or how do we assess learning, or what does the effective lesson delivery look like, or how do we provide support for struggling learners, and using that previous mindset, we kept bumping up against that, and it was just leading to frustration. So it was a lot about giving people permission to, we really do need to create a new reality for what's happening right now. We used a phased approach for doing that, for providing our students and our families and our staff with support. Paul mentioned briefly that first phase that we went into was really just getting food and technology and at-home resources to our families, all the while training our staff to be able to deliver distance learning. We partnered right away with a distance learning expert and consultant named Jeff Utek. He's provided, at this point, 4 different whole school district trainings for our staff. The first thing that he did was train our staff on some core platforms that they can use for providing distance learning. Google Classroom, Google Meet, a program called Screencastify, and then another program called Flipgrid. With that training under our belts, teachers began with their students reviewing previously taught material. And then the week following that, they progressed into new learning, and we are continuing to refine and improve our delivery as we go. One of the things that we're also spending a lot of time doing, as Paul mentioned, is digging deeper into our engagement numbers. Who is really with us? Who is yet to be with us? And what steps can we take to try and re-engage our families? Our distance learning model has some key components to it. The 2 most obvious components are asynchronous, which means pre-recorded video messages that teachers create. And those video messages can be instructing students to do some investigation and post video responses. Teachers could read to students and then ask students comprehension questions. They can pose a math problem, and students could film themselves solving the math problem with homemade manipulatives, for example. And then teachers, when students respond to those asynchronous prompts, then teachers are able to provide feedback to them. Partnering with those the asynchronous video messages is what we call synchronous or live office hours. These are our hour-long sessions that happen 2 to 3 times per week, where each teacher is available for students and parents to join a live Google Meet, where they're able to see their students and talk with their students. Originally, we thought that a lot of that would be taken up, that time would be taken up with students having questions about the actual assignments. But what we learned was that those office hours became the place where we really reinforced the relationship piece. And that's where we spent time supporting our students' social and emotional learning. That's what the bulk of our office hours are for. In addition to that, our teachers monitor student participation on a lot of the online learning platforms that we have available to our students, such as iReady, Reading or Math, or Lexia, or Imagine Learning. These are all just computer programs and curricular programs that our students can access from home. And then our teachers also provide weekly communications to students and families in more of the traditional way that they always have, around phone calls or emails or electronic newsletters. Embedded within all of that is the support for our special education students. Our learning support special education teachers are collaborating with our gen ed teachers and those teams to provide accommodations for their students. Many of the technology pieces that we put in place include systems for accommodations for students. Our special education teachers are also making individual contact with families 2 to 3 times a week, and then tracking student progress on their individual education plan. Currently, we have put together a work group to begin making tentative plans for the next school year. OSPI has released some guidance about possible scenarios for opening up for next school year. We are fairly confident at this point that we will land somewhere in some sort of a hybrid approach hybrid, meaning involving some distance learning components, but also potentially some in-person teaching and learning delivery. Part of that work, making plans for next year, includes some focus group meetings that Paul and I are hosting. We've got a series of 10 different focus group meetings where we're meeting with our teachers, our parents, and our students from all three levels, elementary, middle, and high school, to get their feedback on what worked for them with distance learning, what was a challenge for them, and what can they share with us that would help us as we make plans going into next year. We've held 2 of those focus groups sessions already with our secondary teachers, and a couple of the stressors that they have pointed out or needs for improvement would be additional training around the technology piece for our families. They suddenly got thrust into the position where they needed to be facilitating some at-home and technological learning with their students that they may or may not have been prepared to do so. And then also just the very real reality that our teachers are also facing going through this global pandemic. So as they're continuing to teach their students, they're also dealing with their own children who potentially are at home with them. Some of the silver linings that they've said that have come out of this time are the different ways that we can use technology to enhance student engagement, and really relying on the power of teamwork. For our professional learning communities, there's been kind of a resounding call that the teachers are finding this so incredibly valuable during this time when everybody's kind of trying to figure things out and building the airplane in midair. So what we've also heard and what we've witnessed is just an incredible amount of resilience from our staff and our students and our families. And that's the spirit that we're committed to embodying as we move forward and make plans to go into next year.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I appreciate your time. For those of you just joining us, we are hearing from Wenatchee and Eastmont School District superintendents, and then we're going to turn it over to the Q&A. Next, we have Spencer Taylor with Eastmont Elementary Education.
Thank you, Kristin, and just want to echo everything that Paul and Mike said. You guys covered it really well, and just appreciate you and your team at Wenatchee. And it's always good. We can call each other and say, "How are you? What are you guys doing? How are you processing this?" It's nice to know that we're not alone. So thanks to Wenatchee School District. A couple things I want to echo. This is hard. This is hard for our staff. This is hard for our kids. This is hard for our families. For our staff, they got into this because they love working with kids. They love being around them, the energy that they have in those relationships. It's hard pre-recording a message and just sending it off and hoping that the kids will be able to engage with it and their technology will be working and there's enough bandwidth in their house and they have a caring sibling or adult that's available to help them. There's just been many hurdles, and just everyone working so hard together and showing a lot of grace through this. Everyone has to know this. I think it's going as well as it possibly could, but it in no way replaces the great things that are happening in classrooms every single day. And I specifically think of our little ones, who are learning how to read, which is an incredible, it's almost magical kind of thing. And when they don't have access to their teacher and they don't have those sequential phonics instruction and modeling, it's really hard. So a huge shout out to our teachers, our paras, and everyone in the district, and also for all of our families for working so hard to make it happen. When we first launched into this, just like Wenatchee, it took us some time to regroup, and to be honest, we were waiting for clarity from the state. I think there's some confusion that the community may think that we have so much local control, we can do whatever we want, and that's not true. We do have some local control, but we take a lot of guidance from the state and directives from the state. And originally, the original message when we first heard schools were closing is, don't proceed with instruction unless you can meet the needs of every single student. How do you do that when you don't have access to every single student? So it took a lot of time just figuring out what is our path and what's the right thing to do and how can we reach every single student. So again, like Mike said, the collaboration was incredible, even remotely between our teachers and families. And just a typical day, you would see kids tuning in. They may have a pre-recorded lesson they listen to. There may be a scheduled time where all their classmates can get together, just like this Zoom meeting, when you have this grid of all their friends. That's probably their highlight. It's just to see and talk and do some of those things that happen in a school, like just sharing what they're doing, or hey, here's my dog. Just some of the human connection that has been so difficult to have for all of us in the stay at home has been instrumental, I think, for our kids and our staff. And then we have a portion of our kids that are not engaging, and it varies from grade level and by school. And our teachers are calling, our counselors are calling. We have people doing safe home visits, meaning they're socially distanced and wearing a mask and not going inside, because we care and we want to make sure that the kids are safe. And if there's things that we can help with, our staff has just been trying to do really whatever it took to help our kids connect. But if you can imagine, you could have single or two-parent families. Maybe one of them has been laid off of work and there's that stress, and you've got typically multiple kids to manage. You may not have very strong internet. You may only have one device besides a phone. How stressful is that on a parent who's already stressed about their own health and their income, and trying to help these kids learn to reach these incredibly rigorous standards. We expect a lot of our kids, and our kids really do achieve well, but it is so hard when they're not with us, and parents don't know the standards really well and all the best practices. That's why we have these amazing teachers. There's been so many challenges, but really, just like Paul started out with, just so proud of everyone making the best of a very, very difficult situation. I'm so thankful for our community in working together. I'm so thankful for our teachers and their responsiveness. They started out, really, to be honest, assigning too much. They were, trying to replicate what was happening in the classroom, and that's impossible. It's impossible to put that all electronic. It's impossible for families and kids to do all that and to have limited interaction at different times. That was a big stressor and a big challenge. But also things that haven't been said yet, like music. We still have music instruction. Our music teachers have lessons and sometimes do synchronous learning, like Mike was talking about, to help the kids continue to learn and have fun in music. Our PE teachers have been developing things that kids can do even if they're stuck at home, to be active and keep their health and fitness going. And there's just so many more people, great instruction that has been happening across the district. So again, relationships have been key through this, and very, very proud of everyone working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Spencer. We're also joined today by David Woods, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education with Eastmont School District. David, would you like to say a few words before we jump over to the Q&A?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the order that you put us in, because all of the gentlemen ahead of me are no problem talking a lot, and I'm a man of few words, so I appreciate that. This is where I fit. I have to just reiterate whatever everybody else said. I guess the silver lining parts of it are what's been kind of important for me to see, just staff from different schools that normally don't spend a lot of time working with each other. I mean, not that they're avoiding each other, but this kind of gave them ways to work together that they normally wouldn't. And I'd really like to give a big shout out to both high school principals. They've been working lockstep this whole time. They put in hours and hours and hours above most people, and just trying to make it the best experience they can, especially for the seniors, which is, I have a senior, and it's kind of sad for them. It's hard on them. And I think Lance and Eric have both done a great job of trying to help those kids get through it. So, other than that, also to reiterate or build on what Spencer said, he was talking about the music lessons. We also have coaches sending out. I have 2 athletes in my home. I have coaches sending them out workout plans and things for them to keep in good shape and do that kind of stuff. And they really appreciate that. They're actually working out on their own. And of course, it's not the same, but it's pretty good compared to what could be. And again, what Paul said, just really proud of our staff and students and parents for the most part, just realizing that it's lousy. There's nothing about this situation that's good, but we're trying to make lemonade out of lemons. And for the most part, that's what we're doing. So again, I'm just really proud of people on both sides of the river. And I'm really enjoying the fact that the precedent has been broken of Wenatchee and Eastmont not really working together. We're working together. We started before this happened, but it's really helpful going through these things together instead of like trying to go on our own way. As I said, I don't speak that much. So there you go.
Thank you for sharing with us today, David, Dr. Gordon, Spencer, and Mike. I really appreciate your time. I have been receiving questions via email, via Q&A, and via Facebook Live. I've got those in a list format here, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to kind of jump in and we'll get started on those. So you're all invited to participate in real time by sending us questions, and I'll keep those on my monitor. First, I want to thank you for sharing the positivity that you have today. I can tell you have a love for your work and an enthusiasm and a love for those students, and I really appreciate that. I've got two little ones at home in Wenatchee School District Elementary School. And I just want to say that I have newfound respect and admiration and appreciation for what their teachers do every day in the classroom and what they're doing right now. And it's difficult. So I really appreciate your time spent talking about the two different school districts, how you're working together, some of the positives that you're seeing in this, and we're just going to jump into questions here. One question that we're seeing a lot of is, are distance learning standards being developed for elementary and secondary distance learning? And this question has many parts. One is lesson delivery, platforms, tools, and apps. Even among my own two kids, we're seeing lots of different platforms used, many even just throughout the day with one child and one teacher. But it's a question we're seeing sent in a lot. Are there ideal platforms? Are there some standardization? Are there lessons being learned and shared along the way that can help standardize that?
Great question. Mike, you want to go ahead?
Oh, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Well, we were both unmuted, so yeah.
Right.
Okay, so I'll start and you can jump in. Yeah, I think that's an area that we can improve upon for sure. We want to make this as simple as possible for our families, and we do have, during a typical school year, we do have different platforms that teachers are using, and we're trying to narrow that down to Google Classroom being the primary one. We do have some high school CTE classes that I believe it's Moodle. David would know more. But what we need to do, and I think we did an okay job, but I think we could improve is, if you have a student that's a kindergartner and a third grader, the format would be similar in how you navigate. So that's if we, like Mike said, we're trying to figure out what happens in the fall, but that will be an area that we could certainly improve upon. And that's our plan to do so.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. We started with our core four that I mentioned, and then there's another program called Class Dojo, which is kind of a classroom management program that is used mostly in the lower grades. And some of the feedback we were getting is that families were getting somewhat overwhelmed with the different programs that we were using. And the different messages that were going out to them. Like each time an assignment got posted in Google Classroom, they'd get an additional message. So parents potentially would walk in to see their inbox and have it flooded with a bunch of different notifications. So we are trying to get better at that. We found some workarounds so we can limit some of the notifications and try and make sure that we are focused on kind of our core set of components to deliver teaching and learning going forward. So, and like Spencer said, that will be the work that we'll take with us into next year, regardless of what next year looks like, how we can more effectively use a standard set of tools.
Thank you for sharing.
I'd say on the standards themselves, that's another area where You know, when you stop instruction on March 17th and wherever teachers were at, and then trying to figure out, okay, across the district, across elementary, across middle, across high schools, how do we create some sense of semblance for our parents to be able to figure out what are the most essential pieces for us to be teaching and learning at home? Again, I'm not a certified teacher, so how do I navigate this, and what's quality, what's not quality, what is that work? And honestly, those are the big pieces of work that we're going to be taking on for next year, because we did notice that's an area of struggle, and really just trying to make sure that what are those most essential standards that we need to be teaching and learning currently, and then as we look into next year.
Thank you. On this same question of standardized distance learning, we've received a lot of questions about lesson assignments and timing and lesson submission issues. So parents that are trying to help their kids who, you know, maybe get them started first thing in the morning, but lessons aren't coming through till 9 a.m. when maybe they've had to go to work already. Assignment submission issues where on such a variety of platforms, all the assignments need to be submitted or turned in a variety of different ways. Are discussions being had about standardizing some of those as well?
I can take a first stab at that. Jeff Utek, the trainer that we were working with, his suggestion based on his experience with other districts in the US and in other countries was that releasing assignments would be on a scheduled, a very well communicated schedule so that they come out at the same time each week so parents and students are able to anticipate those. He had shared that his guidance was to avoid releasing assignments anytime the teacher gets them done. For example, if I'm working on a Saturday afternoon and I have created something that I'd like to give to my students, to not necessarily send it on Saturday afternoon, but wait until it would be maybe my lessons come out at 9 a.m. on Monday, and then there's enough lead time for the students and the families to do whatever is required of that lesson before they had to resubmit it back later in the week. So, but like anything else, we're trying to get better at that, and the feedback from our families has been invaluable.
I would like to add I agree totally, Mike. One of the things in our process of learning, we had some of our teachers who felt like it was best for families if there was a variety of times, trying to meet everybody's needs. You know, we don't know our parents' schedules, you know, so they were trying to adjust as they learned, you know, got feedback from families. Well, this family is better in the afternoon, this family is better in the morning, but that caused a lot of frustration. I think one of the biggest takeaways we've had is set up or maintain routines so it's the same kind of thing each day, and that echoes just exactly what Mike said. So a huge thanks to our parents who've sent feedback. You know, initially, like I said earlier, was it's too much, you know, and so we pulled back, and then we heard feedback. We need some routines. We need to be able to count on things. And that was one of my biggest ahas. Mike also alluded to that, was the amount of emails generated. You don't realize, you know, when you're editing your Google Classroom and assigning things, that it's automatically generating emails, which in and of itself can be overwhelming to families. So that's an area we'll continue to work on.
Thank you. Another question about security issues, and I know I face this even with my elementary school students. We had a hard time being able to view lessons because we had parent permissions set up that prevented them from being able to see some of the embedded videos. And we're seeing that from a lot of, that come up in a lot of these questions from parents. The school issued devices versus home devices, access to sites that maybe normally would have been restricted to parent controls. One parent shared that they're receiving a Securely report, which I think the Wenatchee School District is sending out to parents to show online progress, that what students are doing online, showing lots of time spent on YouTube, which they said they were surprised because their router normally blocks their kids from viewing YouTube. So we're seeing some questions about that. Can you guys speak to security?
Yeah, I think from the security standpoint is, especially with the devices that we've sent home, and I assume Eastmont would be the same piece. There are a number of restrictions on it. With the YouTube, one of the pieces that we did disable was the educational YouTube, which allows for a number of different opportunities for kids to engage, but it's a very filtered YouTube account. It's not the general YouTube account that allows kids to access anything and everything under YouTube. But that has been one of those challenges when you are faced with the pandemic. You're handing out computers and you're trying to mitigate one problem. At times, others start to creep in that you need time to understand it at a little deeper level, because for most of our kids, they're not taking home our devices on a nightly basis. Now that world has changed. So now we have to think differently about what it is we want our students and our parents accessing via a district laptop or iPad or whatever the tool may be. So again, probably going to hear a lot of this today. We keep rethinking, we keep understanding, and these opportunities to engage with parents and community members helps us to think differently about what's needed. What do our parents need if we're going to continue in this world of some at-home learning? What do our parents need to be able to support their students at home? And that appears to be one of them.
Yeah, there's, as Paul was saying, we are required, plus it's best practice, to have pretty strong filters to make sure the content our students have access to is appropriate. It is incredibly complicated because each different site has its own parameters, and some of our curriculum uses sites that, let's say Vimeo. Vimeo is one that won't allow you just to do certain videos. If you're in, you get to see everything. And YouTube, we had challenges with that as well. So it's a constant dance at a school district, even before the pandemic, of tight enough that we can make sure that students are only viewing what's appropriate, but loose enough that they can have access to the curriculum that's out there even at home. But that's also been a huge challenge, is not only for our own staff learning these new technologies, but at home when a student's not able to engage. Is it they don't have the bandwidth? Is it that they have an old device that's just, it's not updated, it's not working very well? Is it user error that they don't know how to access things? Lots of hurdles. And again, thankful for our teachers for all their phone calls saying, what's going on? How can I help you? And our tech department for problem solving. It really was a team effort to get people to be able to get on every day and access what they needed to access.
Thank you. We have a question here that says, our state superintendents have stated that nothing prevents a school district from providing childcare for anyone in the food supply chain or any of their family considered essential. This question is asking about support for agricultural workers in our region and wondering if the school districts would consider opening the childcare options for food supply related students.
You know, it seems to make a lot of sense. It's something that we can go back, review our guidelines as to what's allowable, what's not allowable. But it seems to make sense as frontline workers and ensuring that, you know, the food supply continues to move forward. But I don't have a perfect answer for you right now.
So I've been really involved in that, and the community may not know that both Eastmont and Wenatchee have been providing childcare since school closed for essential emergency medical providers and first responders. That term essential, I think many people are confused because the governor has a list of essential businesses and occupations, but that's very different. So we've been working really closely with Confluence Health, among others. And every day we have students who are coming to our schools. We have a couple different sites and are provided childcare so that we could have these essential emergency medical professionals and responders out there dealing with everything else and making sure people are safe. The guidance hasn't opened it up for us to provide childcare to others. even though, like Paul said, yeah, it makes a lot of sense, but until this date, so we've got the governor, we've got the Chelan Douglas Health District giving us guidance, among others, that we are obligated to follow. And the last thing we want to do is have a whole bunch of children together and the COVID-19 spread, through them to others. So we have to be very, very careful, and we have a lot of precautions in place at our childcare sites right now to minimize exposure.
Thank you. We have a question about connectivity. I've heard, I think all four of you speak to different ways the school district and teachers and staff are connecting with families. We have some questions on that about how families can sign up to receive a call or a visit, and whether or not that support is offered for bilingual.
So on the connectivity, so when I hear that, it is literally, am I connected to the internet? Absolutely. So if there's a need, reach out to your child's teacher, let them know that, through phone calls, let them know that you need that support, and we will figure out a way to continue to support them from a connectivity side of things, and trying to make sure that our teachers and our school administration and district office continues to making engagement our number one priority for all of our kids. That to us is a big piece as we look forward to these next 18 days. How do we close that gap between the engaged and the unengaged? And again, it's kids who are turning in work, kids are showing up to our open office hours. We're really trying to make sure that we can close that engagement gap right now before we move into the fall. So that's a top priority for us, is to try to figure that out. Why are kids not engaged with us? And again, that's a myriad of reasons. Some of them financial, some of them different reasons. But that's a big push in our district.
Kristin, you'd asked about the bilingual. We have bilingual support for technology. If it's just a connection problem with a device or Wi-Fi, we have that available in bilingual as well. We also have folks at each school who are our family advocates, and they can be a family's main link, especially if the family is a Spanish-speaking family. We have those at all of our schools, and they can help get families connected with the resources that they need.
Ditto. Well said, you guys.
Good. I would ask if you have the opportunity. I'm hearing speak to your teacher, and I'm also hearing that there's some district-wide support offered. If you have the opportunity, would you add links to that in the chat so that our parents and viewers can use those links to help get connected?
Yes.
We talked a little bit about connectivity, and in some ways we use that word in a lot of different meanings. In some ways that can mean, connecting and engagement. In other ways, it can mean infrastructure, digital connection. I had the opportunity to sit in on a call about how we're connecting to those without Wi-Fi or personal devices at home. So from a more infrastructure standpoint, can you talk a little bit about the community collaboration on hotspots, affordability, infrastructure, on that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. Just really proud of this team. As this first started, we thought, okay, we've got to connect with our hospitals, the CEOs of our hospitals, and a few others. And it really has snowballed into this large community support regional from LocalTel, Native, Spectrum, our hospital CEOs, Link Transit, LocalTel, the regional library, the regional museum, and others to come together to really think differently about how to create connectivity. And it's exactly what you said on this issue. It is about the structures of the fiber to getting into the homes or wherever they are. So we had two goals: a short-term goal, which are the Wi-Fi hotspots, the little ones that partnering with GWADA and the regional library to offer a number of hotspots. But again, there are limited numbers, and the back order for those are pretty extensive. And then long term, let me go back a little bit more on that. Short term was the work of the PUD, Localtel, and others to put up larger hotspots. I'm using that term interchangeably between the two, but the larger ones had a much broader reach in areas, and then tried to connect with other organizations around if they put up these larger Wi-Fi hotspots that people could drive into the parking lots. Like our school districts have those, and those are radiating out a little bit further. Wenatchee Valley College, Link Transit will be putting hotspots into their buses. Again, the PUD and Localtel putting up different areas. So we really want to make sure we're communicating that out in the coming weeks to our families. But probably the long-term piece that I'm really proud of is the work that the internet companies, PUD, and others have done to reduce the cost. They're pulling down the fees and working with the agencies to say, okay, at this rate, and I heard a week ago on the call, we're about $30 for internet in the home with no hookup fees. I mean, those are huge pieces. And there are some other subsidies that you could add to it that could get the internet connection down to about $18 to $20 a month. It's not perfect, but it is a better long-term solution, because short-term, the small hotspots and the larger community-wide hotspots are very expensive, and that's not sustainable over a long period of time. But this type of program where we're trying to communicate out to our communities, trying to get it into the hands of our communities through paper, through posters, through communication links. The Our Value, Our Future has an incredible Latino communication network that we push out that we'll be pushing out into to ensure that more and more people are making these connections and putting posters up at our agricultural sites so others can connect with it. Because if we don't have that taken care of by the next fall, we're going to continue to have this equity gap that some kids are going to be able to get education and some are not. And that is, for all of us on this call, that can't happen. So it's efforts like ours and others around the region who are trying to come together to help our community move forward. But it is a partnership, and that's what I talked about at that last meeting. It is about the power of partnership, because the school district, quite honestly, we have very limited resources to be installing. It's just not our bad choice of words here, but that's not within our bandwidth to be creating fiber and to be creating, spots on the houses to connect the internet to. That's just not what we do. But what we can do is facilitate conversations and allow others to help us and help our community members. And I'd say this is beyond education and why we thought the hospitals was so important. As COVID continues, our community members are going to continue needing access to our doctors, continuing needing access to pay bills. And this is a bigger issue just beyond education. So I'm really proud of the work that's going on there.
Thank you. I see that our time is running short, so we're going to move on, but I'm really inspired by that, by those community connections and collaborations. So thank you for describing those. We're seeing some questions come through about data about engagement, participation in classes and distance learning. Can you speak a little bit about how we're doing as far as encouraging our families and students to participate, and what additional support we can provide for underserved populations?
That continues to be a challenge at the elementary level here at Eastmont. We have probably 15-20% that either are choosing not to engage, or we've just lost contact, and that's not because of lack of effort. Phone calls are being made, home visits are being made safely, like I mentioned earlier. Some families, it's just too much. They're on the edge with the stresses of life, and they are choosing not to, which is really unfortunate. So we probably have, I would say, 50–60% that I'd say are highly engaged, and then there's what's the difference there? 20 or so percent that partially engaged, and then 15 to 20% that are not. And it's even when school is in session, we do have a small percentage that are chronically absent, even though we have policies we follow, and which is truancy laws and everything like that, and phone calls and home visits. There's just a small percentage that it's difficult to get the kids to school. That has increased, unfortunately, and we continue to work together to try to find strategies to give them the access that Paul was talking about. We do paper pencil work if they choose not to or cannot get their internet connectivity. It's an ongoing challenge that we don't have a really great solution, but we're giving it our best effort.
Yeah, Spencer did a nice job of articulating that, I would say, and Paul, go ahead and correct me if I'm wrong, but our numbers would be pretty similar to what Spencer was discussing. And it is important, and this goes back to one of the first comments that I made at the very beginning about a new mindset for how we think about these things. So we have struggled in the past to get certain folks to be with us and be connected with us when we're not inside a global pandemic. And so the fact that we are in this time of crisis kind of compounds that and brings it to light even more so. But I would agree wholeheartedly with what Spencer said, that is something we are continually look at. Paul and I in the cabinet, we talk about it on a daily basis during our cabinet meetings, talk about those engagement numbers and what we can be doing for families.
And what we're finding out, it's different at each level too. I think it's harder at elementary. It gets a little easier at middle school, and you get into the junior high and high school. We have pretty high levels of engagement, but that's because they need that for credit. I think that's one reason. Plus, they can connect better than by themselves and they don't need the help of their parents and all that kind of thing. So I think that there's quite a bit more participation the higher up you go in grade levels.
Thank you. Follow-up question on that credit. How are we evaluating or assessing student learning when exams are not required in this year? Are there ways to assess the learning process? And then a follow-up, we're getting some specific questions about children that are really motivated by participation points or by a desire to see their grade and to know that both their attendance and their participation, their assignments are counting for something. Can you talk a little bit about how we're assessing student learning during this time?
Well, that is a little different based on what grade level you're at. So for credit-bearing courses, and this was a good example of how the two districts really were partnering and things. So we adopted pretty similar policies about how we approached awarding credits during this time. We are still able to assess learning. So it doesn't always happen in a paper and pencil test the way perhaps it has in the past, but where our teachers are continually assessing learning, giving feedback to students based on their progress towards mastering essential learning standards. We have gone to the grading policy at for the high school level courses where if a student is engaged with us, they are doing the majority of the work, they are getting feedback from their teachers that they do get an A for their end of course grade in that course. If they are unable to engage with us, regardless of the reason, then they would get an incomplete and be given the opportunity to re-engage with those learning standards. That was part of some of the guidance that we got from Superintendent Reichdahl around doing no harm during this time, so that we're not gonna let circumstances that are completely outside a student's control have a potential negative impact on their future as far as credit accrual and acceptance into college or different programs like that.
Thank you. A follow-up to that, I think we're all probably assuming there will be some gaps, things that we've missed this year that teachers would have caught had we been in the classroom. How will teachers focus on kind of achieving those educational gaps in learning in the coming year?
So first of all, We have intervention staff that are continuing to intervene even through the pandemic. It's just, obviously it takes a lot more time, and it is more challenging doing that remotely. So yeah, there will be gaps. Like I said earlier, our standards are very rigorous. I know both at Wenatchee and at Eastmont, we have really solid intervention systems that, we teach kids grade level instruction, and the older students have an opportunity for, honors and advanced placement, but we have support systems where we can find where the gaps are, and we can help give them instruction to help fill those and catch them up. It's something that we've always had. When kids start kindergarten, we have a lot of our students are not ready, so we start intervening in kindergarten and have a little bit of a preschool intervention, but would love to do more with that. Early learning is a key, but we'll just continue those systems as best we can, and the sooner we can get back to our normal operation, the better. Just, I think, for everybody's sanity as well as learning, because there is a lot our kids need to learn. Let somebody else take it from here.
Yeah, I'd go back to the reliance on the team that I talked about earlier. One of the things that we did in Wenatchee, and I'm sure Eastmont did something very similar, was identify which standards we are going to be focusing on for the remainder of this time, so that we know, have some better sense of where potentially the learning gaps are going to be when our students are back with us the following year, and then really rely on those teacher teams to collaborate with one another to try and backfill any of those important standards that may have not been hit to the depth that they would have traditionally been hit. And we're seeing that even across grade levels, where our middle school math teachers communicating with our high school folks on the students that are leaving 8th grade and going on to math classes at the high school, where those teams are communicating around where the potential gaps are, so that some of that backfilling can be done right away.
And our high school next year is switching to a 3x6 trimester schedule, and one of the reasons for that is to build in intervention time classes for students that they know are have a gap there. So they've actually going to change their schedule a little bit just to approach that problem.
Thank you. We're seeing a lot of questions come through about, and I think this speaks to the standardization or the uniformity between teachers and between classrooms that we've talked about a little bit. But a question about how parents can share feedback with both districts or with schools on distance learning and teacher participation. I've seen that even among my own kids, but we're seeing a lot of questions come through about teachers that are participating at different levels. Some are really engaged, lots of assignments and instruction coming through, and some that are less so. How can parents help support the schools with that type of feedback?
So one of the things that the Wenatchee School District will be doing the last week, and probably that first week of summer, is that we're going to be putting out a survey and asking our parents for that type of feedback. The reality is, as I started, this is new for our teachers too. And there is a huge spectrum of comfort around technology from some teachers who lived and breathed technology. I mean, some of the things that we were seeing pre-COVID from some of our teachers were mind-blowing what they were doing. Other educators really struggled in the area of technology. And Mike and I have heard a few of those pieces where they were scared to be jumping on this, and then to be putting a video on themselves and teaching and sending that video out. So this is that place of grace, understanding where everybody is at, and it's hard to go to uniformity. When on March 17th, we were teaching in a brick and mortar, on that next week, we're teaching online, and every educator had to figure out what online learning looked like for them. And I recognize we've been doing this for 3 months. And I would say when we're on those calls or those Zoom meetings with Jeff Utek, I mean, we've got about 700 staff members who are listening and trying to engage. But again, the spectrum of where people are at with their technology skills, we're still varied and wide. But I would say to every educator in our district, and I think I know it's true in Eastmont, every educator has improved. And maybe it was from this level to this level, and others were here and they moved up even further. But I know every educator has improved in their technology, their way of delivering. And I can't emphasize this enough. And I know David and Spencer and Micah have hit on this before. The delivery is vastly different. There was no flipping a switch. There was none of that. They're used to the face-to-face contact and then going to this. However, now saying that, we know the highly likelihood that we're all coming back next August and the traditional environment, none of us believe that. So we have to, these next few months, it's incumbent upon leaders, and when I say leaders, I mean that's teacher leaders, that's school building leaders, that's district building leaders, collaborating to figure this out even better for next year, because there won't be any excuses. There won't be any of that work we have to get this right on day one, and that's a big challenge for each and every one of us.
I think I would encourage parents to contact their child's teacher. The teachers are reaching out, at least at the elementary level, at least once a week, if not more, talking to families, how's it's going, and they really appreciate the feedback. Sometimes parents aren't aware of some of the things that are available, and so it's just a communication gap. But I just found our teachers to be incredibly responsive and just want to make it the best situation for our families. But as far as we at Eastmont, I know at Wenatchee too, we do appreciate when our teachers are, more similar than not, but we do appreciate a little bit of, and have a little bit of flexibility in that the personalities of our teachers and their passions, we don't want to stifle that. So there is a little bit of difference, and I think that's just part of the spice of life, that they add their own flair to the things that they're doing. So contact your child's teacher, and I'm sure you'll get it resolved.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I'm looking at our time, and I'm thinking we need to move toward wrapping up. I would like to invite the four of you back to discuss again what this might look like in the fall. And when I had reached out the first time, we've heard that we're still waiting for some guidance from OSPI, and we're waiting to know, to kind of nail down what that looks like for our local school districts. And I respect that and appreciate that. So I would love to have you back later this summer as we know more about what that looks like in the fall. And I appreciate from a parent point of view what you talked a little bit about, training the parents too. I know that I have a lot to learn as a teacher and as a mom, and I would just really appreciate that from the community perspectives. I'd like to pose one final question to you, and this is probably looking a bit into that crystal ball. Talked a little bit about that OSPI guidance starting to come out. I'm wondering, to what extent do we anticipate COVID-19 will impact modes of teaching and school safety in the future beyond this school year, and maybe even beyond the next?
One thing I would say beyond a shadow of a doubt is we have learned some powerful ways that we can better utilize technology. So regardless of the way that COVID-19 plays out, I think those lessons and those skills that we've learned will definitely have a positive impact going forward.
Boy, that's a tough one to look into the future, but yeah, I agree with Mike. I think even though it's been incredibly stressful and challenging, the learning that has happened with our teachers has been amazing in using technology as a tool. So I think that is something we will see more of. I think we'll see more of different options available for families and more online options that some families just appreciate that, and that meets their needs. We have a lot of challenges, and assuming, like Mike said earlier, about a hybrid model, partially at school, partially online. How do we keep our students safe, especially at an elementary school? I just think of recess and lunch and pickup and all those times where kids just love being together, and how do you keep them from just wanting to hug each other and give each other high fives? It's certainly going to be a challenge. I did have a little side note to Kristin and Kenny and Mariah and Anna at the museum. Our kids really missed their museum field trips this spring. and just appreciate all the support you guys have provided us over the years. And that's just one example of many things that it's been a loss of, and David mentioned graduation is probably the big one. But there's so many things, traditions, and let alone the relationships that have come at a cost. And I think there's some grieving in all of us for all of that. But we'll work together, we'll be prepared, we'll provide the best instructional environment at school, remotely or both, that we can.
And sir, I really appreciate you saying that. And let me just say on the behalf of the museum that we really miss our kids too. We are looking at ways to bring our field trips to teachers and to classrooms virtually next year. We understand that there will probably be very strict guidelines as far as being able to come visit us at the museum. So we're working really hard on bringing the museum to you and to teachers. So I invite the public to check out the educational videos and tutorials that we've been posting so they can continue to engage with that out of classroom learning. Michael, Paul, and David, are there any other final things that you guys would like to add before we close today?
Mine would be just the appreciation for the community. As everybody has said, it is, as a newbie in the area, I am blown away with the support, the kindness, the empathy that is shared, and recognizing the situation we're in, and giving us some of that latitude to figure this out as we go forward, because probably what we know more is that there's a lot of unknown coming our way, and hopefully the state will give us some better perspectives here in the coming weeks, and then we will communicate that out. But we'd be happy to join you for another conversation when we know more, and as we start to make plans as we get ourselves ready. But like Spencer, I just want to thank you for the partnerships that make education even more meaningful when kids can be engaged in really unique ways, and seeing the museum and being a part of the history makes a big difference for our kids. So thank you.
Yeah, I would just reiterate that as well, and thank our community and our staff for their resilience. If you think about the scope of the change that both of our districts have gone through, in a traditional frame, that would have taken months or potentially even years. We've changed literally every aspect of how we do business in a matter of days. And so in order for that to occur, it just takes a huge amount of optimism and resilience on the part of everybody that's involved. So just thanking everybody. We truly appreciate it.
Yeah, I reiterate everything that just said there. I just also think it points out really strongly, or it should, how important our teachers are. Teachers kind of get beat up sometimes here and there, but education isn't magic. It's performed by really well-educated, well-trained, very dedicated people that we need. We can't use a computer to teach. It just isn't the same. So, I hope people can appreciate how great teachers are and let them know that.
Well, thank you. To recap, today we've talked about how COVID-19 is affecting school closures and distance learning in our community, both for Eastmont and Wenatchee. We've talked about parent requests for kind of that uniformity, that standardization. We've talked about the resilience of our students and of our parents and of our families and of our teachers. The scope of change in such a short amount of time. We've talked about the importance of identifying those learning gaps, about how we recognize that need to intervene. We've talked a little bit about teacher training and the tremendous amount that they have learned in such a short amount of time. And the need for family training. There's a lot more that I need to learn as I move forward with my own kids. We've talked about parent survey tools coming soon. We're hearing from many parents on this call that they're really eager to share their feedback, to see some uniformity, to a desire to keep their kids connected and standardized. We've talked about connectivity issues. We've talked about a need for security in that connection. We've talked about accessibility. We've talked about a need for bilingual access. and for bilingual support for parents as they try to help their children with these lessons. We've talked about just a tremendous collaboration between our community, and I want to thank both Eastmont and Wenatchee for joining in that collaboration and in that spirit today. And we've talked about this being an ongoing conversation. So I want to thank everyone who joined us as an attendee, who submitted their questions, who participated today on Zoom and on Facebook, or sent their questions via email in advance. And I especially want to thank our panelists, Dr. Paul Gordon, Michael Lane, Spencer Taylor, and David Woods. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.